I found this news article from 1883 about two guys who had a duel to the death over a woman. I had so many questions like, who were they? Who won? And could I find out a little bit more about these guys from before the fight? And also, what happened to the lady? Did she end up with the winner? In this video, I'm going to tell you about these two guys who shot each other in a rural town 143 years ago. And this video is sponsored by DUEL, but more on that in just a bit. I've read hundreds of pages of newspapers over the last 10 years that I've been a genealogist. And I gotta say, I think it's probably my favorite source of information when I'm going really deep down a family history rabbit hole. Old newspapers are a wealth of information, and now they're easier to look through than ever. A lot of libraries and archive centers still have original newspapers and microfilm scanners, but now we have the power of search engines. I like to use newspapers.com and genealogybank.com for most of my heavy lifting. I'm not sponsored by either one of them. I just like them. These two websites have a lot of overlap of papers between them, but there's a lot of gaps between the two as well. I found some stuff on one website, and then I couldn't find the same article on the other website. I think it has something to do with licensing, that certain websites have licenses to certain publications and at certain intervals of time. I don't know, but it has something to do with that. This is the original article that I came across. I don't remember how I found it, but the headline definitely jumped out at me. And once I started looking into it, I found a twist. Also, if you like this video and want to see more content just like it, be sure to like and subscribe. Don't forget to check out our new shop where we have t-shirts and coffee mugs. Died in a duel. Two men kill each other in a duel. A bloody and fatal affair, one instantly killed and one mortally wounded. Specialists recount that Lewis Phillips and Jacob Rosenbrook, two young men residing near Vandalia, Illinois, had a duel near that city early yesterday morning. The weapons used were pistols and both were killed at first fire, Phillips lingering 4 hours after being shot. Another account from St. Louis: a fatal encounter occurred early this morning near Tulane City, Stark County, Illinois, between Lewis Phillips and Jacob Rosenbrook, both residents of Bowling Green Township, in which the latter was killed instantly and the former wounded so badly that he died a few hours later. The affair had originated in a grudge of long standing, growing out of disrespectful remarks by Phillips concerning Rosenbrook's sister. Each time they met, they quarreled, and yesterday morning they decided to settle the matter in a duel with pistols to be fought at 6 o'clock in the morning at the place mentioned. They chose as their seconds Max Swank and Jack Wren, who were present and witnessed the shooting. Rosenbrook fired the first shot, the ball entering Phillips's mouth. Phillips staggered and before falling, discharged his weapon, the ball taking effect at one side of Rosenbrook's mouth, ranging upward through the head. Both duelists were young men, Phillips being about 22 years of age and a school teacher. Neither of the seconds have as yet been arrested. So there's a lot here. This article gets a lot of things wrong. So let's dive in. I do a lot, and I stay busy. In fact, I get asked all the time how I'm able to juggle having a full-time management job, a wife, 3 kids, and I've been spending the last 4 years prepping land to build a house. And not to mention all of the research, writing, and editing for this channel. I'm always into something, and when I'm in the zone, I need fuel, and I need it quick. And that's why I love DUEL. One shake, and I'm good. If I miss breakfast, I grab a DUEL. And if I know I'm going to be editing on my lunch break at work, I've got a DUEL Black Edition ready to drink, chocolate peanut butter ready to go. Or if I'm going to be out in the woods all day cutting down trees, I'll have a DUEL Black Powder Edition. Strawberry. And let's be honest, if you're a genealogist, then you already know what I'm talking about. You've spent hours down a family rabbit hole and you missed a meal. More than once. And that's why I recommend DUEL. And my personal choice is the Black Edition powder. It comes in several different flavors. 2 scoops, add water, shake it up, and you're done. With 400 calories and 40 grams of protein and all the macros a growing boy could want, it's kind of hard to believe it's only $2.65 per meal. Check out DUEL in the description and pinned comment down below and use promo code Forgotten Lines. New customers receive 15% off their first order over $50. Now this story has a lot of pieces to it, but something that jumps out at me is the reason. Lewis Phillips was apparently running his mouth about Jake's sister, so Jake decided to have a duel at 6 in the morning. I have a hard time with this. I have a sister. And I would say we're pretty close. But Rachel, if you're watching this, I'm sorry, but I don't think that I would get up at 6 o'clock in the morning to fight some man to the death over something he said about you in a letter. But I guess that would be testimony to the way things were handled back then. It seems so foreign to us now, but back then, this wasn't all that out of the ordinary. Maybe in 1883, it was a little out of the ordinary because dueling had actually been mostly outlawed in the 1830s, 50s, and 60s. It wasn't all that common anymore by the time this happened. I joke about not starting a duel over my sister's honor, but that was actually exactly the kind of thing that would have led something like this to happen. In fact, I've come across a few duels in newspapers that were fought over much less than this. All that said, this fight had nothing to do with Jacob Rosenbrook's sister. This news article came out basically the day that it happened, so the details weren't completely all out yet. I found Jacob on the 1870 census in Bowling Green, Illinois. He's 10 at the time and living with his mom, Lydia, who is a domestic servant from Ohio. His mom is on the 1880 census after marrying a Mr. John Wren. Remember, Jack Wren was present at the shooting. And Jack is a pretty common nickname for guys named John, so this could possibly be the same guy. Jacob isn't there with them in 1880, but one of his sisters still is. Katie Rosebrook, it's spelled a few different ways. This is important. Remember this little fact. We're going to come back to it. But I found Jacob living in Texas in 1880 with someone named Ruby Evans, and he's working as a cattle hand. And I'm sure it's him because the Jacob from our news article was born in Illinois and his father was from Vermont, just like this guy. And he's living with someone named Evans, which is important too. We're going to come right back to that one. It's all going to make sense. And you'll come across this a lot. People turning up states away 10 years later on a different census because of work opportunities. Usually it was by word of mouth or a relative or friend of the family or somebody who had an opportunity that they tagged along with. I couldn't really find anything about this Ruby Evans, but also Ruby back then was sometimes a man's name, short for Reuben or just Ruby. So it could have been anybody, really. But again, it's a major circumstantial clue that's going to come back to us. If we use newspapers.com, we can type in his name, give a date, range, and a state. And here are several more articles about the shooting. And here's a tip for using these websites. I don't like to use a specific city or town, especially a small one, because typically those newspapers that were printed in those places weren't scanned for the major websites, so they won't turn up. So it's better to use a broader search term like the state, maybe the county, or a neighboring large city. But I wouldn't use a small town for the results. Half the time it doesn't even let you. Scrolling through these other results, the dates are a little later and they were able to learn more about what happened. This article is a little closer to the truth. Rivals in love. You can pause to read the whole thing, but I'll give you the highlights. They were apparently both interested in the same lady. This one says they met at 7 p.m., not 6 a.m. And it says they started fighting and Lewis Phillips pulled a gun, Jacob pulled his, and they started blasting. Other articles say it was the other way around, that Jacob drew first and Lewis fired back. So that's a little bit of a muddy story. But they both got shot somewhere in the torso, neck, or mouth, according to different news articles. But it goes on to say in this one, the innocent cause of the tragedy is crazed with grief over the tragic affair. And then the trouble was that the young lady seemed to be unable to decide as to which she preferred, receiving the attentions of both young men with impartiality. So it sounds like the girl they were fighting over was very upset after it happened. And who wouldn't be? Rose Brooks, though, is officially dead here. And it is thought Phillips cannot survive the night as he has an inward hemorrhage. So Lewis isn't dead yet, and we don't have a name for the girl they were fighting about. Jacob is buried in Welch Cemetery with his younger sister who died the year before. His father died in 1868 when Jacob was 8 years old. His parents had been married about 20 years. His mom remarried in 1871 to John Wren, and that's who she's living with in 1880 while Jacob is down in Texas living with Ruby Evans. Now, what about Lewis Phillips? Lewis wrote a letter, and it was basically a fake. He was in the letter pretending to be Jacob Rosenbrooks and saying a whole bunch of nasty stuff about the lady. Well, then he signed it as Jacob, and Jacob found out about it, I guess from the lady, and asked to see it and take it so that he could confront the guy who lied and wrote the letter. He wanted to go deal with Lewis face to face finally. And that's when everything went south. But in early accounts from that day, they all said that Lewis died, that they were both killed. But we know that's not right. He survived. And a month later, he's arrested for murder. The papers are pretty optimistic that he'll be acquitted in self-defense. Witnesses said that Jacob started the fight. I couldn't find anything after 1883 for Lewis. He kind of drops off of public record. I don't know if he didn't get the acquittal and ended up in jail for the rest of his life, and maybe he died in that gap of records of 1890 where there is really no census. That could have been the last of him, but I don't know for sure. But who was the lady they were fighting over? One paper gives us a name, Miss Evans. The papers never give us a first name. So the question is this enough for us to figure out who she is? And I think there's enough there. Let's see if we can put it together. Remember the first article that said it was Jacob's sister? Well, the only sister living in town at the time was Sarah Catherine Rosebrook. They called her Katie. But we know it wasn't his sister, but his sister's name was Katie. This is kind of important because look who is living next door in 1880. Katie Evans. Could the reporters have mixed up the Katies and thought that the whole thing was about his sister who was named Katie, but it was actually about Katie Evans right down the road, and they got it backwards? Also, let's go back to Texas in 1880, where Jacob is living. And he's living with Ruby Evans. Could have been a friend of the family of the Rosenbrooks who was related to this Katie Evans back home. Maybe they were cousins. I know they weren't siblings, but I couldn't figure out the exact connection, but it's possible they were related. So now the big question. Did Miss Katie Evans and Philip Lewis end up together? No. She married a man named Edward Luckett in 1890. 20 years later, they're still living in the same county with their 6 kids. 10 years later, in 1920, they are still living in Fayette County. Miss Evans, now Mrs. Luckett, died 2 years later at about 67 years old. I can't imagine what that must have been like to have 2 people fight to the death over you like that. One of the articles did say that she was crazed from grief over it, which I truly believe. She spent her whole life in a small town of only about 500 people. And here we are, 120-something years later, talking about her.